The early written, honest, and historically accurate New Testament reports Jesus showed himself alive by many infallible proofs to more than 500 people during at least 11 different appearances in various places over a 40-day period immediately following his literal bodily resurrection. According to Bernard Ram, in Acts 1, Luke tells us Jesus showed himself alive by many infallible proofs, an expression indicating the strongest type of legal evidence. Those who saw, touched, ate, talked, and or walked with Christ after his resurrection included Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, Joanna, and other women, his apostles on several occasions, Paul the persecutor after his ascension, and 500 unnamed individuals in Galilee. Within a few weeks after the resurrection, these previously crushed eyewitnesses became so convinced by who they repeatedly saw, touched, walked, talked, and ate with, they were willing to suffer and lay their lives on the line for him. Nearly every scholar, skeptical or not, admit Jesus' disciples really experienced something following his crucifixion, and their belief in the reality of this something was so strong they were willing to die for it. However, a dwindling number of doubters still promote the idea each appearance was actually a hallucination, and these multiple spiritual experiences were powerful enough to cause Jesus' followers to willingly suffer and die for the man they incorrectly thought was still alive. There are many excellent reasons to dismiss this theory, including the fact it does not explain the empty tomb, which is a truth admitted by ancient critics of Christ and most modern scholars. If early Christians had simply hallucinated, then Jesus' body would have still laid in the tomb. His body would have then been quickly exhumed and paraded around Jerusalem or displayed within the tomb by the Jewish religious leaders who greatly desired his physical death and decay so they could retain their dominant spiritual influence among the people. Public showing of Jesus' body would have buried Christianity before it even began, but this evidently never happened. Experts in the field assert hallucinations are individual and not group occurrences similar to dreams. Research has shown it is exceedingly rare when the hallucinations of two individuals are exactly alike, and even though subjected to the same environmental conditions, will have different hallucinations. Since this is the case, it is frankly ridiculous for anyone to believe more than 500 people could have shared identical hallucinations regarding the risen Christ, especially when we consider he appeared to a diverse assemblage of people, including men and women, friends and foes, individuals and groups, in various settings, both indoors and outdoors, on at least 11 different occasions over a 40-day period. As scholar T.J. Thornburn explained, it is absolutely inconceivable that as many as 500 persons of average soundness of mind and temperament, in various numbers, at all sorts of times and in diverse situations, should experience all kinds of sensuous impressions, visual, auditory, tactual, and all these manifold experiences should rest entirely upon subjective hallucination. Philip Schaff noted, the chief objection to the vision hypothesis is its intrinsic impossibility. It makes the most exorbitant claim upon our credulity. It requires us to believe that many persons, singly and collectively, at different times and in different places, from Jerusalem to Damascus, have the same vision and dream the same dream. That the women at the open sepulchre early in the morning, Peter and John soon afterward, the two disciples journeying to Emmaus on the afternoon of the resurrection day, the assembled apostles on the evening in the absence of Thomas, and again on the next Lord's Day in the presence of the skeptical Thomas, 7 apostles at the lake of Tiberias, on one occasion 500 brethren at once, most of whom were still alive when Paul reported the fact, and James, the brother of the Lord, who formerly did not believe in him, again all the apostles on Mount Olivet at the ascension, and at last a clear-headed, strong-minded persecutor on the way to Damascus, that all these men and women on these different occasions vainly imagined they saw and heard the self-same Jesus in bodily shape and form, and that they were, by this baseless vision, raised all at once from the deepest gloom in which the crucifixion of their Lord had left them, to the boldest faith and strongest hope, which compelled them to proclaim the gospel of the resurrection from Jerusalem to Rome to the end of their lives. And this illusion of the early disciples created the greatest revolution, not only in their own views and conduct, but among Jews and Gentiles, and in the subsequent history of mankind. This illusion, we are expected to believe by these unbelievers, gave birth to the most real and most mighty of all facts, the Christian Church, which has lasted these 1800 years and is now spread all over the civilized world, embracing more members than ever and exercising more moral power than all the kingdoms and all other religions combined. As scholar E.H. Day observed, the seeing of visions and the perception of exceptional phenomenon subjectively by large numbers of persons at the same time necessitates a certain amount of psychological preparation, extending over an appreciably long period. The more than 500 who saw Christ did not have this time to prepare, for his resurrection appearances occurred just days after the crucifixion. Also, in actuality, many more than 500 individuals personally witnessed Jesus' 40-plus miracles, including his resurrection power. For example, Luke 7:11-17 reports, Jesus went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now when he came near to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, Weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto you, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak, and he delivered him to his mother. And there came fear on us all. And they glorified God, saying, that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God has visited his people. And this account of him went forth throughout all Judea and throughout all the region round about. Similarly, Matthew 9:18 through 26, Mark 5:35 through 43, and Luke 8:41 through 56 tell us, While Jesus spoke these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler named Jairus, and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay your hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said unto them, Give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleeps. And they laughed him to scorn. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose. And the fame hereof went abroad into all that land. This passage exemplifies the specific nature and historical flavor of the New Testament accounts. Naming Jairus, a well-known ruler of the synagogue, as a personal witness to one of Jesus' miracles would have been fatal to the trustworthiness of the gospel writers and consequently Christianity if Jairus and the many eyewitness observers hadn't agreed a true miracle occurred in his and their sight. Lazarus' raising was another of Jesus' public displays of resurrection power. From John chapters 11 and 12 we learn, Many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. People therefore that were with him when he called Lazarus out of the grave and raised him from the dead bear record. For this cause the people also met him, for they heard he had done this miracle. The Pharisees therefore said among themselves, Perceive how we prevail nothing. Behold, the world has gone after him. Matthew 27:52-53 documents another incredibly unique display of resurrection power, stating, The graves were open, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. The gospel writers would have ruined their testimony among the population, and Christianity would have died before it began if this astounding public event didn't really happen, but we know it did, as confirmed by even non-Christians such as Pontius Pilate. It is illogical to conclude, together with skeptics, that more than 500 individuals, some who surely once laughed Jesus to scorn, were all victims of the same hallucination. It is also unreasonable to agree with doubters who flippantly dismiss the testimony of countless people who saw his miracles, and at least several thousand who had personally observed his ability to raise the dead. In reality, skeptics cannot reasonably account for these historical facts. Most modern juries are confident in reaching a verdict based upon the testimonies of just 2 or 3 credible witnesses. We certainly have more than 2 or 3 credible witnesses of Jesus' resurrection abilities. As we've seen in previous sessions, many ancient eyewitnesses proved their honesty and sincerity by dying for their claims. Following a careful review of all the available evidence, any unbiased modern jury must accept the gospel as a truthful testimony of multiple eyewitnesses who are able to verify their claims. Hallucinations are based upon beliefs previously held by an individual, and they only occur within the hopeful minds of those who sincerely want to experience them. As William Milligan said, a candidate for hallucination must have belief in the idea that expresses and excited expectation that the idea will somehow be realized. We have no reason whatsoever to believe Paul the Christian slayer or James and Jude the critical brothers wanted to see the risen Christ. Only irrefutable physical evidence would have caused these convinced skeptics to voluntarily suffer and sacrifice their lives for the one they had previously despised. Similarly, the disciples did not have a hopeful frame of mind, and they were cowering in a hidden room, likely fearing their own death soon after Jesus' resurrection. They clearly did not understand or believe a resurrection would occur. As Day observed, we may recognize the slowness with which the disciples arrive at a conviction to which only the inexorable logic of facts led them. It seems obvious none of these eventual early church leaders were prime candidates for a hallucination experience. T.J. Thornburn observed, hallucinations have never stimulated people to undertake a work of enormous magnitude, and while carrying it out, to lead lives of the most rigid and consistent self-denial and even suffering. In a word, we are constrained to agree with Dr. Sanday, who says, No apparition, no mere hallucination of the senses ever yet moved the world. Yet this is exactly what eyewitnesses of Jesus' majesty did. They literally turned the world upside down with their preaching of the resurrection news in the face of violent persecution and torturous deaths. A subjective experience cannot explain the sacrificial actions and dramatic transformation of all the disciples. Rather, the despondent disciples needed to see and have solid contact with the physically resurrected Christ before they were willing to accept the reality of his resurrection. It was their genuine, concrete experiences with the risen Christ which altered their thinking and permanently set their hearts on fire. As the skeptical scholar Adolf Harnack finally admitted, the firm confidence of the disciples in Jesus was rooted in the belief that he did not abide in death, but was raised by God. That Christ was risen was, in virtue of what they had experienced in him, certainly only after they had seen him, just as sure as the fact of his death, and became the main article of their preaching about him. The resurrection was physical, for Christ spoke, walked, and ate with the disciples. He was also touched by the women at the tomb, and by at least one of the disciples, Thomas, who demanded to personally examine Jesus' crucifixion wounds and look into his face before he was willing to accept him as his Lord and God. The 10 remaining disciples also very likely touched him after his resurrection, as described in Luke 24:36-40 and John 20:19-20. It seems obvious a hallucinogenic spirit cannot walk, talk, eat, and be touched by the disciples as Jesus was. As scholar James Orr pointed out, the disciples' experiences were not fleeting glimpses of the risen Christ, but prolonged interviews. Jesus cleared up the issue of physicality once and for all when he said to the disciples, "Why are you troubled, and why do thoughts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit has not flesh and bones as you see me have." To further drive home the point he was physically risen, Christ then showed them his fleshly limbs and asked to eat some broiled fish as well as honeycomb in their presence. According to John 21:9-15, Jesus built a fire, cooked fish upon it, and again dined with the disciples. There is no doubt Jesus' resurrection was physical. The disciples died not to spread the unverifiable claim of Jesus' resurrection illusion, but rather suffered great persecution and offered themselves as living sacrifices because they had solid contact and communication with the physically resurrected Christ.